Product provided by Nintendo. Alrighty folks, welcome back to the channel. Its-A-Mii here. Today we are talking about The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. After 11 years without a new single-player 2D Zelda game, the day has finally come, and that feels so good to say. As always with my reviews, I will not be spoiling anything in the game in this video, so if you want to kind of just hear about the game, my experience with it after playing for about 15 hours, this is the video for you. Let's get into it. If you've been following my other channel, Bo Talks Games, where I cover video game news, you'll know pre-release I did get hands-on with the game at PAX West, and following that demo, I was very excited for the game. In fact, I was very excited for the game from the moment we saw it. While I was a little hesitant from the first reveal trailer of this new direction where you don't have a sword, right? You're using these echoes to take on enemies and solve puzzles. After playing the demo, my hype level went all the way back up because it just impressed me in ways that I wasn't really expecting. Using echoes and using the new buy mechanic to solve puzzles and take on enemies was something fresh for a 2D Zelda game. We've seen Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom reinvent 3D Zelda. Now it was time for Grezzo to take on 2D Zelda and see how they can kind of apply the lessons learned from those games, right? The open air ended puzzle design of those two Switch games. How can they apply that to a 2D Zelda game? And my early impressions with the full game, right? Several hours of gameplay in. I have finished the game now, of course. Several hours of gameplay in, my impressions were still very strong. Learning all of the ins and outs of what you can and cannot echo and how you can kind of abuse the system to solve puzzles and take on enemies in your own way is very exciting in the first few hours of the game. But as time goes on, a lot of the tricks this game has to offer wear kind of thin, specifically in regards to that echo mechanic. I think that is possibly my biggest downside with Echoes of Wisdom is the core mechanic. So while it is a very big negative thing that we will talk about later in the video, I do want to focus on the positives first before we talk about why I don't really love the echo mechanic. Honestly, after finishing the game, I really don't like it at all, but we'll talk about why in just a little bit. Let's focus on the positive things first, though. Echoes of Wisdom is the first Zelda game where you actually play as Zelda, and while there were some detractors about that online, I was all there for it, right? And I'm still all there for it, and I'm very happy they went with this direction for the story of this game. This iteration of Hyrule is booming with personality, and having Zelda at the forefront, it just helps it so much, right? Having Zelda be in the leading role and seeing how things kind of differ from other 2D Zelda games is just awesome, like how the Gerudo interact with Zelda versus how they interact with Link in other games, for example, right? We're always used to having to sneak around any Gerudo towns or Gerudo villages as Link because they don't allow men in their society, but with Zelda, she's a girl, so that's not really a thing. So just kind of having those comparisons make having Zelda the main character of this game worthwhile for me. And I think it's cool that they're giving her a shot at her own leading role here. There's also just a lot of very cool, very small things for people obsessed with Zelda lore and the timeline and all that I will obviously not be spoiling here. Also, once again, will not spoil it, but this game might have one of my favorite Zelda characters of all time in it, in the second half of the game. Just an absolutely fantastic character. You will know who I'm talking about when you meet him. I promise you. My favorite part of Echoes of Wisdom is just exploring Hyrule and using echoes to just traverse the map. The map is the biggest we've ever had in a 2D Zelda game, and Grezzo just filled it to the brim with content. And in fact, I would go as far as to say this might be the best map or world in a 2D Zelda game that we've had up to this point. They did a fantastic job of bringing Hyrule to life in this game, with characters sprinkled throughout, side content, side stories. Even the art style, I think, plays a major role in this that just makes the game pop. It gives it that personality, that flair that you're looking for from a Nintendo game, from a Zelda game. And while I understand that art style might not be for everyone, I know some people didn't love it when it happened in Link's Awakening, and I know there are some people that think it doesn't make sense in the context of this game, whereas in Link's Awakening, that game is a spoiler alert, right? So the whole chibi aesthetic doesn't fit as well for Echoes of Wisdom. I'm fine with it. I think it looks great. They're reusing assets. It gets the game out faster, and it just looks very good. I will say I did experience some frame drops through my playthrough. I would say maybe a little bit more than Link's Awakening, a little bit more inconsistently, right? For me, Link's Awakening, I didn't have that many issues with the frame rate in that game, but there was that one swamp area very on with the chain chomp that was, of course, atrocious on Switch. There's moments like that in this game, but they're just kind of sporadic throughout, I would say. So there are never any frame jumps that are worse than what happened in Link's Awakening, I don't think. But at the same time, it's not as consistently in one area, right? It just kind of happens at different times when you're spamming echoes. So that's obviously kind of like overloading the game, and that'll cause the frame rate to drop. But overall, for me, as someone who doesn't care that much about frame rate, it wasn't like a deal breaker or anything, right? Like, it didn't bog my experience down that much, but I do think it's worth mentioning. The music in this game is also top tier Zelda. The past two Zelda games, of course, being Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, have amazing soundtracks. I love the entire vibe they went for with those games, with a lot of the piano medleys and all that. this game is a return to traditional Zelda music, if that makes sense, right? Link's Awakening Remake, it's more of that music, basically, and Link's Awakening Remake has a really, really good soundtrack, so to get more music that sounds in that vein, in that traditional Zelda vein, is a huge positive for me. We also have the return of almost traditional dungeons, so this is like a positive and a negative at the same time. So dungeons are back, right? This is the first new Zelda game since A Link Between Worlds that has traditional dungeons with a boss at the end and keys and doors and stuff that you open. It does not have dungeon items as you would expect because you have echoes. So there are dungeons that have like echoes that are themed around the dungeon and they want you to use the echo that you find in that dungeon, but there are no dungeon items, which I do think kind of hurts the theming of dungeons in general in this game. The boss fights are fantastic, possibly some of the most fun boss fights in a 2D Zelda game, I will say. And I think that's when the Echo combat is at its best, when you're fighting a boss. I think that is when the combat is the most fun in this game, as we'll talk about more a little bit later when we get to the negatives. But I will also say this. It's been a long time since I played a 2D Zelda game. I will be real with you. I think the last time I played one was Link's Awakening. I had this feeling the entire time I was playing Echoes of Wisdom, anytime I was in a dungeon, they're too easy. They're too straightforward. I was never like, okay, what do I do? What do I do in this dungeon, right? There was never a moment I was like, okay, I don't know what to do. Anytime I wasn't sure where to go, I just open up the map and it's like, okay, I go over there. The dungeons aren't that big. They're kind of straightforward. They're kind of easy. I could imagine a lot of people being disappointed by that. It is a return to form almost in regards to bringing back dungeons with traditional bosses, but also I don't think it's quite to the level that we want from the return to form 2D Zelda game, right? This is not the grand return of traditional dungeons like so many people have been wanting. We are not quite there. It is a step in the right direction. It is not the full step that I think so many of us were hoping for with Echoes of Wisdom being the first new 2D Zelda game in 11 years. It's just not quite to that level yet. With that being said, though, with me saying that the dungeons are too easy and straightforward, there actually was one dungeon that I struggled with for probably like 20, 30 minutes, because having the open-ended puzzle design in a 2D Zelda game, like, in a 3D context, your possibilities are basically endless. In a 2D Zelda game, your possibilities aren't really endless. They can give you 100 echoes, whatever it is, but your possibilities, there's still a finite amount of things that you can actually do. And there was one specific puzzle where you have to hit 2 switches at the same time that was not clicking for me. I did not have the echo I needed or something. I think what happened is I needed a different echo, and I simply did not have that echo, so I kind of just had to brute force my way through it, which felt like poor design. Now, that might just be me. Maybe I just missed the echo, but there was something missing from that dungeon that felt frustrating in a way that I don't think I've really felt from a Zelda dungeon before. You can look at the Fire Temple in Tears of the Kingdom and think, okay, what are you actually supposed to do with all these minecarts? You kind of just brute force your way through it, but you still brute force your way through it because the possibilities there are basically endless, like I was saying. With Echoes of Wisdom, you kind of just have a bunch of mobs and then some like statues, and the list is, it's a big list. There's a lot of things in there, but the actual kit that is useful isn't that big. So I did want to include that. There was one singular instance in this game where I felt like I was stuck and didn't really know what to do, and it was just kind of like weird. Like, it was a weird feeling for a Zelda game. Every other time in this game, it was very straightforward. I had no issue. There was one dungeon, one temple, where I was just like, huh? Like, what am I supposed to be really doing here? And it took me a while banging my head against the wall and just spamming random echoes. And then eventually one worked that I promise you was not the one that was supposed to work, which I guess actually could be a positive thing if you're looking at it from that angle, right? If you prefer having puzzles that you can solve in any order, that is a good thing. And generally, I do prefer that. That's why I love Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I am a huge fan of those two games. But in this game, it just doesn't feel quite as satisfying as the other two. There's also the rifts in this game. Of course, this is a huge plot point where you go into the still world. This is possibly the best part of the game. Like I said, I talk about how the exploring the overworld is just a lot of fun in this game. These still world sections are awesome though, and frankly, I think might be the game at its best in terms of really flexing what the echo mechanic can actually do, and what I think Grezzo and the team over there really were aiming for with the echoes. Echoes to solve puzzles and to do combat is one thing, but echoes to do platforming, actually pretty fun. And then you also have the 2D side-scroller sections from Link's Awakening returning. Of course, this is the first time we've had 2D sections in a Zelda game since Link's Awakening, I think. Did the Oracle games have them? I'm not sure, but the 2D sections in this game and these Still World sections, having platforming in a Zelda game and having simply platforming to a higher ledge being a puzzle, that is when the echo mechanic shines honestly at its best. When you're exploring the overworld and you see a piece of heart up high somewhere and you have to figure out how to get to it, that is when the game is at its best. That is when the echo mechanic is at its best, which is so weird because I don't come to Zelda for platforming. I come to it for puzzle solving. I usually come to it for some combats. I don't come to it for platforming. And like I said, the platforming in this game is inherently a puzzle in of itself because of the way the echo mechanic works. But it is a little odd coming to this game and having that be my takeaway, right? But I will say, once again, Still World, the 2D sections, very cool. Glad they added those in. And also just the Still World whole atmosphere, this whole purple rift vibe. You see Hylians that have been taking into the void and they're just still and they look like corpses. It's very unsettling and very cool. But let's go back and talk a little bit more about that echo mechanic and why I ultimately think the entire concept kind of just falls flat and why I think it really holds this game back from being one of my favorite Zelda games, really even being in my top 3, 4, maybe even 5 2D Zelda games, which I know is a disappointing thing to say. I think this game is very good, and conceptually there is a lot of cool stuff going on here, but the echo mechanic being dull and boring later on in the game is enough to really bring this game down for me, which is just, I don't like saying that. I don't like being negative about a Zelda game. I'm a Nintendo guy. I don't want to be hateful on the Zelda game, but man, the echo mechanic just gets really old really fast. It makes combat extremely, extremely trivial very early on. I was championing in this game early on, you know, pre-release. I was saying, hey guys, listen, let's wait and see. Maybe this whole new thing where you're playing a Zelda and you don't have a sword and you have to summon other enemies to fight enemies for you. Maybe this will really work out and be something fresh and new for the 2D Zelda series. And hey, it is fresh, it is new, but it's not good. Combat is simply too easy, and I'm not saying other Zelda games are that hard, really, right? But once you get like a P hat in this game very early on, for example, and then later on when you get the stronger mobs, while you could experiment with other things, sure, like in Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, the game doesn't incentivize it at all. I loved messing around with combat situations and trying different things in the 2 Switch games, but in this game, there's just no point. There's basically no reason to engage in combats other than just, look at my strong mob do the thing. It's not satisfying. You just sit there and watch it. You just lock on and watch a mob and throw a spear at an enemy. It's not satisfying. It's novel for the first couple of hours, but it wears thin very, very quickly. So yeah, I think the echo mechanic basically ruined combat completely in this game to the point where it's not like offensively bad. It's just boring. It's just boring to do combat in this game. The boss fights are entertaining. Those are different. You know, there's different solutions to how you actually damage a boss, and there are some cool things with the mobs and the echoes in this game that kind of borrow from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom in terms of like the synergy and how, you know, the whole prototype was lighting fire to a bush and then it spreads, right? There's stuff like that, which then can also apply to some combat elements, but I think overall the combat in this game is just a miss for me. I just want to swing a sword, man. And hey, the game does have a solution to that. If you don't like the echo mechanic, there is the sword fighter form that you get. That's the best part of combat in this game, is when you're just playing a Zelda swinging a sword. I think it'd be cool if they could find another thing for Zelda to do, and if Zelda is the lead of the next 2D Zelda game, if they give her more traditional magic attacks, I think that'd be awesome. If they just want to give her a sword, though, I honestly would be fine with that, because when you're using the sword fighter form, when you're in the rifts, for the very limited time that you have it, because it is a very limited bar until you upgrade it more later on, it just kind of reminds me of the other 2D Zelda games that I adore, and just makes me wish I was playing a game like that instead. I hate being so harsh on this because I really do appreciate that Nintendo and Grezzo tried to do something new with this game. And I think from like a puzzle standpoint, which we'll talk about in a second, it's fine. It's something that they tried and it's new and it's something different. But I think for the combat, they should not have focused on that. I think that was definitely a big misstep with this game. And that's the thing, right? You would think, okay, echo mechanic, maybe for combat it was kind of an afterthought. Maybe for puzzle design it's a lot better. Kind of. It's a little bit better for puzzles, but if you've played the game, I know the game is out now. If you've played the game, you realize pretty early on that most puzzles in this game are, like I was saying earlier, they're kind of related to platforming and getting up to a higher area, right? This map is very vertical. The dungeons have a lot of verticality to them. Most of the puzzles kind of just boil down to you stacking beds left and right to get to a high point, and then maybe you spawn a keys or something, then you float with the keys. There are other things that you can do, once again, but when the solution is so easy to spam one echo, maybe I'm just not creative, right? Maybe that's a me issue. But I did not feel this way when playing Tears of the Kingdom and using Ultra Hand and Fuse. In that game and in Breath of the Wild, I was experimenting with so many different ways to approach so many different situations. In this game, I was just spamming beds. I'll be honest. For a lot of it, for a lot of the puzzles, you can just put down a bunch of beds, stack them, and then get up to a high point. For any stealth section, there's a few stealth sections in this game, completely pointless. You can just get to the top and just go over all of them. But I do want to reiterate, like I said earlier, the platforming in this game, using echoes in the still world and in the 2D sections, while a lot of that bed spam carries over quite a bit there, it's still like one of the highlights of the game in that context in terms of platforming. When it is specifically you're trying to get higher up, there are these like spiders you can use that can kind of spawn webs and stuff. There are spiders that you can kind of bind yourself to, and that's a whole other mechanic too that I think does add a much needed layer of depth on top of it, right? You have the bind mechanic, so basically what happens is it's very it kind of reminds me of Ultra Hand and how it's like this big green aura that attaches itself to an item or an enemy or an echo, and you can either bind yourself to it to pull it towards you or move it, with you, or you can kind of lock yourself to it. So let's say you lock it to, I don't know, a Zol or something, and the Zol's just jumping around. Zelda will kind of follow its path, which does give some pretty interesting and unique ways to solve some puzzles. I do want to give the game that credit, right? Well, I think the puzzle solving when bind is not required is pretty boring and stale. When you're using bind, that is also pretty good. I do like bind quite a bit. Also, I know some people had an issue with this in Tears of the Kingdom. I personally did not have an issue with it in Tears of the Kingdom, but I do have an issue with it in Echoes of Wisdom. Selecting your echo through the menu, this big list of echoes that pops up, and scrolling through it is really tedious and really slow, and there's no way to favorite certain echoes. You can sort by your most used echoes, you can sort by echoes you recently learned, you can sort by type, but you can't sort by favorite. Why can I not favorite like 10 echoes and just have my list of favorite echoes that I'm using? Let's say you're in an underwater section, right, and you need to get an echo enemy that can fight underwater, and you don't use that echo very often because you're not in underwater sections that often. You have to scroll through possibly 100 echoes to get to it. There had to have been a better solution for that. There had to have been. It's really unfortunate. I think the rest of this game is really strong, or most of the game is very strong, I should say. The world is awesome. The world map is awesome. The story is great. The characters are some of the best we've had in a Zelda game. Certainly some of the best we've had in a 2D Zelda game. The music is top tier Zelda. There's plenty of really cool side quests in this game. This game has a more traditional side quest setup like the recent Zelda games. So you literally have like a quest list and you take quests from NPCs and you can like bring them objects, or maybe they want to see an enemy or something, and it's nothing super complex, but there's a lot of fun stuff there. There's some cool customization options where Zelda can have different outfits, and there's this whole like armor system that you can upgrade, and there's also the sword fighter form and that you can upgrade and stuff and have longer duration of using the sword fighter form. The dungeons are back. They're not quite to what I want. They're a little too easy. There's no dungeon items, but they are back, so that's kind of a positive. The pacing in general of the game's flow, the story is very good. How you're going from dungeon to dungeon, story stuff happens, dungeon, like that. That is all very, very good. As a hardcore Zelda fan, the world of Hyrule that Grezzo created with this game is one of the best interpretations of Zelda that we have ever had. But the actual game itself, because of the echo mechanic being so not great, in my opinion, it's just not that fun to play after a while. That impression is very strong early on, but once you learn what you're doing, once you really kind of break through and understand, like, okay, beds, okay, pea hats, it just gets old really quickly, man. So while I did really want to love this game, I really wanted to hold it in a similar regard to Link's Awakening remake and Minish Cap and A Link Between Worlds, I can't do it because it's just not as good as those games. It just isn't, which is really weird to see from Nintendo this generation because Nintendo has been so on top of their game. Every new entry in dormant franchises has been the best entry in that franchise. Not even just dormant franchises, just even popular franchises. For me, Tears of the Kingdom is a top 2 Zelda game next to Breath of the Wild and Wind Waker, so top 3, I guess. But that's like, I love that for 3D Zelda. Even stuff like Kirby. I think Kirby is at its peak right now with Forgotten Land. For a lot of people, Fire Emblem is at its peak with Three Houses. Maybe not so much Engage. I like Engage. 3D Mario with Odyssey. 2D Mario with Mario Wonder. But then we get to 2D Zelda, and it just doesn't feel like it made that same jump that almost every other thing on Switch has made, which is just, it's just disappointing, to be honest. And it is easy to nitpick. This game currently has an 86 on Metacritic, and while I was pretty negative overall in this review, you have to view it through the lens of Zelda. A lesser 2D Zelda game is still like just a really good video game. Like, I still really like this game. It just does have glaring issues that I don't think can be overlooked. But that is going to do it for today's video. If you have been playing Echoes of Wisdom, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you agree with me or do you disagree? If so, why? I would love to get a conversation going. Of course, you can subscribe here for more Nintendo Switch reviews, but also a lot of Nintendo collecting content. I'm not sure when it'll go up, either before or after this, but I will have an unboxing of the new Zelda Switch Lite very soon, so stay tuned for that. And of course, you can follow my Nintendo news channel at Botox Games and on Twitter at the same handle. Until next time, folks, peace.